Nintendo finally did it. They released Game Boy games on the Nintendo Switch. I don't want to play with you anymore.
Game Boy Advance.
Now before you throw your Game Boy away, let's take a look at that service, huh? Why not, right? The original Game Boy service comes with a total of 9 games. They included 4 Game Boy Color games and 5 regular Game Boy games. You can now play Alone in the Dark for the Game Boy Color, which I heard is really good. Metroid 2 on the Game Boy, Super Mario Land 2. I guess they just forgot about the first Super Mario Land, and they skipped straight to Wario Land 3. And of course, Tetris, which was one of the pack-in titles with the Game Boy. And don't forget about Link's Awakening and Gargoyle's Quest also. They also released this Game & Watch Gallery 3, which is a Game Boy Color game, and Kirby's Dream Land. Not a bad list, not a bad list. These games can also be played multiplayer locally or online, but it only offers to play with your friends. And in the settings, you can actually have the original Game Boy, the Pocket, or the Game Boy Color kind of screen, and you can even have the original classic feel. And they don't know that I know this, but you can actually toggle the European version of the games on as well. So right there, you already doubled your library. I guess if you grew up with the European version, some games might have some differences between the North American versions. I'm not sure which ones. And as far as the classic feel, here's Super Mario Land 2 with the classic feel toggled on. And it generates more of the original like pixelated look. And here it is with it toggled off. It looks a little cleaner, a little crispier. Now my favorite setting is the Game Boy Pocket setting. That way, you still get black and white, but it's not everybody's, favorite shade of green from the original Game Boy. I'm just kidding. Probably the one I'm gonna play with is obviously the Game Boy Color, so I can have color in my games. You know what I'm saying? It's not a bad list of starter games. I mean, I've played Tetris, Mario Land 3, Super Mario Land 2, but I'll definitely check out Alone in the Dark. The graphics here are pretty impressive for a Game Boy Color game, I'm not gonna lie. Although, not impressive by today's standards because it's pretty fuzzy. But this game gets kind of pricey if you want a physical version. It's like $40 for the cartridge alone. Nintendo did also include games that are coming soon, such as Kirby's Tilt and Tumble, which I kind of played in a previous video. And the Pokemon trading card game is actually a really fun game, and it teaches you how to play the Pokemon game correctly. They're also going to add the Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages and Seasons. So hopefully Nintendo will keep releasing games onto the platform, just like the other services. But why don't we move on to the Game Boy Advance, huh? Why not, right? Now the list for this one is a little bit shorter, 6 games, which are, they're kind of random. I mean, you have Mario Kart Super Circuit, Mario Bros. 3, they just skipped straight to Super Mario Advance 4. Then you have WarioWare Inc., the first WarioWare, so that was pretty nice of them. And then they have Zelda Minish Cap, and they also included Kuru Kuru Kurin, which I've heard is pretty fun, this little puzzle game. And the last game is actually one that I know very well, Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga. That one was actually just as random as the Kuru Kuru Kurin one. I mean, of all the Game Boy Advance games and they choose Mario & Luigi, does this mean they're going to be a new Mario & Luigi? Now, just like the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color, the settings are the same. You can toggle the European versions off and on, and you can also reproduce the classic feel from the Game Boy Advance. It's the same concept. It basically looks a little more pixelated, a little bit more like the Game Boy Advance screen itself, but personally, I'll probably toggle that off because it'll look nicer on a bigger screen. Now, these games being on the Advance, well, they're a little more advanced. Now, for example, if you go into Super Mario Bros. 3 and go into the options, it still has the settings from the game, obviously, and you can toggle the sleep on and off, although it doesn't actually work when you hit L and R and select to put your game to sleep. But the thing that does work is a rumble feature. It's meant to be used with the GameCube Game Boy player connected with the GameCube controller, as the setting says here. If you toggle it on, it actually does make your control rumble. And one other important thing that was included in Super Mario Bros. 3 was that they included all the e-reader levels. So this is definitely definitive version of Super Mario Bros. 3. Well, looks like you're gonna join the Game Boy e-reader. I've never actually played these e-reader stages, and there's a lot of them. So you could certainly spend a lot of time playing these, and you can also play as Luigi now. He basically plays like Super Mario Bros. 2 Luigi, where he kind of jumps really high and hovers a little bit. I hope this means that Nintendo brings more games that have e-reader function to the service, especially since it gets kind of expensive collecting those cards nowadays. Another game I think was a perfect fit for this service was WarioWare. It's a pick up and play a quick session kind of game. And now that there's a WarioWare game on the Switch, you can play the game where it all started on the Game Boy Advance. The real meat and potatoes of all the games from the Game Boy Advance library here has to be the Minish Cap and Superstar Saga. Both are, I guess, technically RPGs and are big adventures that are going to take longer to complete than the other games. I haven't actually played the Minish Cap, but I'll probably try it out now that it's on this service. And the final game, the Kuru Kuru Kurin, it's actually a really good game. It's a little puzzle game that you gotta maneuver this little bird that goes in a spaceship, and it basically rotates, and you gotta time your movements throughout the level and try to get towards the end. It's like a perfect pick up and play game, and it actually turns out to be the game I've been playing the most of the whole library. So I would definitely check that one out. Now as far as the multiplayer, it's the same as the other services. You could play online or locally with your friends. This is where I started to see an issue, not in the multiplayer aspect, but in the whole service itself. Now some people might think that it'll replace your Game Boy Advance, or maybe they'll come down in price at the whole Game Boy retro market.
Wrong.
Even if they had every game on here, people still like to collect physical games, me included. But the one thing that this service doesn't have, that the regular game or Game Boy that can take and play anywhere, is not that portability factor, because the Switch is portable. And you can play offline, but only if you logged on or opened one of the apps in the last 7 days. So if you're going somewhere where you don't have Wi-Fi, make sure to open the app at least 7 days prior to going there. Then you can play all the Game Boy Advance games on your Switch offline. And Nintendo also separated them into the different categories of their online service. The $19.99 regular version does give you Super Nintendo with those NES, and they added the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games for that. But if you want to play the Game Boy Advance games, you have to go up to the next tier, the $49.99. But that does include the 64 games and the Mario Kart and other DLC for other games. I was basically forced to go to the $49.99 plan because I wanted to play the Game Boy Advance games. The original Game Boys, not so much, because they've been released on every other Nintendo system so far. And Game Boy Advance games, you were able to play them on the Wii U and the Wii, and also the 3DS if you had an Ambassador one. But it's been missing from the Switch since it came out 6 years ago. So the service isn't perfect, but it'll probably improve. I'll guess I'll go fish my Game Boy back out of the trash then. Sorry about that, I think I got too ahead of myself. There we go, just put this back on the shelf. Perfect.